Crooked River, Chapter 31. That savage is nothing but an outright liar. A big pork-faced woman stood up and hollered so suddenly I nearly jumped out of my skin. The judge had to pound his gavel for quiet, and he ordered the sheriff to take the woman out of the cabin. It took 2 men to pull her out by her elbows, shouting and hollering the whole time. Once the room grew quiet again, Peter Kelly asked the interpreter to repeat what he said. I looked over at the jurymen. I couldn't tell what they thought of Indian John's story by the expression on their faces. Vinegar Biggers was cleaning his fingernails with a penknife, and the Hoadley brothers were slouched so far down in their chairs they looked half asleep. Only Mr. Hawley seemed to be watching the proceedings with a careful eye. Did he believe what Indian John interpreter finished? Some people in the crowd coughed loudly and shifted in their seats. An uneasy feeling had entered the cabin. It made me think of when Pa and the men played a game of cards, how the room would become suddenly tense and warm, and someone would get up and throw open a window or two. In front of the room, Peter Kelly folded the papers in his hand. That was all I wanted the jury to hear, Your Honor, he said in a firm voice. I wanted them to listen to Amick's own account of the events and consider carefully what he said. Mr. Kelly's final determined words seemed to stay in the air even after he sat down. I was real proud of him. The judge nodded at Augustus Root. With his hands clasped behind his back, Mr. Root took his time walking toward the witness chair, and he gazed rudely at Indian John for a few minutes, as if he was an exhibition that had come to town. Sweeping his arm toward the jury, he said in a stinging voice to Indian John, "You expect the good, hard-working gentlemen of this jury to believe you are a friend of the white man? A friend?" His voice mocked. "Yesterday, you painted your face with the stripes of a savage. Today you sit before us wearing the ornaments of a savage, speaking the language of a savage." I could feel a lump rising fast in my throat, and I tried to brush away the angry tears that were filling up in my eyes. My pa put the stripes on Indian John's face, my own pa. But dreadful Mr. Root kept on. "You expect the jury to believe that 2 white trappers trespassed on your river? What was it called?" Mr. Root looked at the paper in his hand. "Ah, yes, the old river of many fish." He grinned at the crowd. "You say the 2 trappers came to this river of yours, stole your worthless traps, took what you had caught, and that gave you the absolute right to put a tomahawk into the skull of one of them. Am I right?" Shaking sobs had begun to fill my whole chest, so I could hardly take a full breath. In the front, Peter Kelly jumped up to object to the questions. "The defendant testified he did not kill the trapper, Your Honor," he hollered at the judge. "Quite right." Mr. Root waved his papers in the air. "You're correct, Mr. Kelly. The savage testified that he sat in his tent all night in peace toward the white man, while his Indian friend killed the trapper with a tomahawk." I could hold back the tears no longer. As some of the men clapped and stomped their approval for Mr. Root, Laura whispered that if I couldn't keep hold of myself, I had best take Mercy and get outside before someone noticed. Clinging to Mercy's little hand, I fled from the cabin. Outside it had stopped raining for a time. The pale green leafed trees dripped water like wet wash on a line, and the gray clouds scudded across the sky. I took a deep, shuddering gulp of air, trying to forget the scene inside. "You want to throw sticks?" I said to Mercy. "We'll go into the woods and throw sticks. How about that?" For an hour or more we hurled sticks at the trees. More often than not, Mercy would fall only a few steps in front of her own feet, but mine would land hard and angry sounding against the trees. Mercy laughed at the sight, and that made me feel some better. By and by, Laura came out to find us, standing on a dry patch of ground. She said the lawyers were giving their final speeches to conclude the trial, and Peter Kelly had spoken real well. She told me she heard a few folks whispering that he had given a daring speech for as young as he was. I wiped my hands on my apron. Daring? He told the jury that there were good Indians and bad Indians, the same as white people or any other people, Laura repeated. And he said that the men in the jury were sworn to give Indian John as fair and full a trial as any white man. He told the men that no human life, not even an Indian's, ought to ever be taken away unless the accused was guilty of the crime and the evidence proved without one shred of doubt that Indian John was as innocent as any one of them. Do you think the jury will believe him? I asked, wanting to believe they surely would. Laura was silent, looking out at the woods. I don't know, Reb, she said uncertainly. Perhaps after what he said. Perhaps they might. It was a brave speech to give. It was, but I don't know. The jury would meet and give their verdict the next day, Laura said, and then the whole terrible business of the trial would finally be done. In the Ojibwe game of moccasin, you must watch carefully to guess which moccasin holds the marked musket ball. You must look into the faces of the moccasin players, and you must not be fooled by their dancing arms or their loud drum. You must watch with your eyes and guess what each one is hiding. When I look at the white chief and his 12 strangers, I think of the game of moccasin.